Why you have to make all these excuses for her? This, like I said, all this was this week was people who said, "Oh, she ran a flawless campaign. How ridiculous!" Or it's sexism, it's racism. This is an old playbook.
Yes, I didn't say any of those things.
I know, but I've heard a lot of these things, and I think America's perfectly willing to elect a woman. They just didn't like the last two that were put up.
The vice president to Joe Biden, whether it was a male, female, black, white, or anything else, was going to have a giant political albatross around their neck, and they could perform perfectly or perform imperfectly. But that person was going to be at a disadvantage.
She didn't make a good case. Well, she didn't denounce the past stuff that people didn't like. She just tried to ignore it.
I've been on that MSNBC, mate. It was propagandist nutcrackery on there. I went on a show called Morning Joe. It was absurd the way they carried on.
Good Morning Joe.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know what it was. It wasn't morning. There was no one called Joe there. No one could concentrate. They didn't understand the basic tenets of journalism. No one was willing to stick up for genuine American heroes.
Bill Maher is on fire, effortlessly dismantling the same tired arguments from woke MSNBC guests, and social media is loving every second of it. At this point, MSNBC journalists might want to reconsider if Maher's platform is really the best place for them because the takedowns are getting brutal. So, which MSNBC guest found themselves in Maher's crosshairs this time? And what did he say that left them scrambling? We've got all the receipts, so stick around as we break it all down. And before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe for more sharp, unfiltered moments like this.
I also think everything the candidates, especially the Democrats, do to get voters annoys them. The constant texting. Did you get the texts from Tim Walz every 5 minutes, and always begging for money and knocking on doors? We've got people knocking on doors. People don't want knocking on your door. Who in this day and age wants someone knocking on? Kids don't even like it when a phone call. That's like too much of a invasion of their privacy.
Bill Maher exposes the real reason Kamala Harris struggled, and it wasn't the message. Bill Maher didn't hold back, as he expertly dismantled the hypocrisy in MSNBC's John Heileman's argument. Heileman claimed Kamala Harris failed because her message didn't reach the right audience, but Maher pointed out the real issue. It wasn't the message, it was the medium. Democrats relied on legacy media outlets like MSNBC and CNN, platforms that already lean in their favor, essentially preaching to the choir. Meanwhile, Trump was tapping into much broader audiences through neutral platforms like Joe Rogan's podcast and Theo Von's show. And when the legacy media strategy flopped, instead of adapting, Democrats doubled down, resorting to mass text, messages, and even door-to-door outreach, crossing into people's personal space. Rather than meeting voters where they actually were, they stuck with outdated tactics, alienating potential supporters along the way.
Might emerge as the strongest Democratic opposition leader in the next Trump era. Oh, well, that's a good question. I mean, like Adam Schiff, he won right big.
He won big. I like Wes Moore.
Wes Moore's fantastic. He's in Maryland.
Yep.
But who's going to be the one? Gavin Newsom we have here in this state. He's already called the legislature to. Trump hasn't done anything yet, but I understand the.
This was the problem. There was a 2014 study that showed that Fortune 500 companies were more likely to pick a female CEO if the company was struggling, basically setting women up for the big job, but to also fail. If they did well, fine. But if they failed, look, we have a female CEO while failing. And that's what I feel like they did to Kamala Harris. When Biden refused to step aside and not run again, he was supposed to be that bridge. He backed off on that promise due to arrogance. And then he drops out after a catastrophic debate performance, and they set Kamala Harris up to fail.
Is this journalist even talking about? The Democrats had their message locked and loaded. All Kamala Harris had to do was amplify it, and everything was supposed to fall into place. But here's what they don't. Americans are discerning. They weren't just listening to polished speeches. They were looking at their own reality. Skyrocketing inflation, rising crime, an unsecured border. These weren't just headlines. They were daily struggle. Voters weren't swayed by catchy political slogans. They were motivated by lived experience. Even if Biden were at peak mental fitness, it wouldn't have changed the outcome. The issue wasn't just who was delivering the message, it was the message itself. And by the time election season rolled around, voters had already tuned it out.
They set Kamala Harris up to fail. That was a 3-month campaign, and she was supposed to introduce herself to the American people. No wonder people were Googling, did Joe Biden drop out? And so...
No. No. You're saying 3 months wasn't long enough?
I mean,
It was too long.
It was long enough.
It was long enough.
if they had a primary,
It's not that they didn't have time to introduce. They met someone they didn't like.
Bill Maher is spot on. It's not that the Democrats lacked capable candidates to step in for Joe Biden. As Michael Douglas later pointed out on the show, they actually had a strong bench. Governors, senators, and rising stars who were more than qualified to take the lead. But instead of choosing based on merit and leadership ability, they focused on optics. They wanted to appear universally appealing. So they calculated that selecting a black female vice president would lock in support from both women and black communities. Politics isn't about checking diversity boxes. Voters don't just want representation. They want competence, vision, and real solutions. The Democrats assumed identity alone would win hearts and votes, but people saw through it. The choice felt performative, not genuine, and in the end, it wasn't enough to secure trust or victory. That miscalculation may be one of the biggest reasons they're now facing major political...
Sitting vice president, and you get put on elevated to the top of the ticket 107 days ahead of the election. I think that is a very high degree of difficulty put on anybody, and I do not think she is the perfect candidate. I tend to agree with Sarah that probably in a fully litigated primary, she probably would not have been the Democratic nominee, but we'll never know that. But I will tell you that, there's never been anybody who's had the difficulty of that situation, elevated that late in the campaign. Why?
Needed to run away from
Bill, I don't know if you know this, but the vice president of the United States is basically shoved in a broom closet for 3.5 years.
I know.
You couldn't.
She was more popular in there.
Yes, well.
I mean, this idea that in a mass media age, that 107 days is not long enough to know somebody?
You are way overestimating the American people in terms of what their ability.
This is exactly the kind of attitude that landed the Democrats in opposition in the first place. Underestimating Americans. John Heilemann of MSNBC actually claimed that Bill Maher was overestimating Americans' ability to make up their minds. In 3 months. Really? That's how the woke left sees the rest of us? Like we're incapable of critical thinking or making informed decisions? No wonder one MSNBC host had the audacity to say Americans don't even know what they want. News. Flash, we absolutely do. And it's not a puppet who blindly follows the woke agenda. Americans don't want leaders who treat them like they're clueless. We want leaders who respect our intelligence, understand our struggles, and actually stand up for our interests. The left can keep underestimating the American people. But come election time, they'll learn the hard way that we know exactly what we want, and we're not afraid to vote for it.
Someone like Donald Trump has become a universally known, understood, loved by some, hated by others over the course of being omnipresent for 8 years.
Okay.
Barack Obama becomes president of the United States after running for 2 years as president, runs a 50-state primary, is on television, does dozens of Democratic debates, and by the time at the end of that, most people knew who he was. Most people.
Yeah.
You drop somebody into the middle of the top of the ticket, 3 days out, 3 months out, you are going to have to spend a lot of time trying to introduce yourself to the country while also being in a steel cage death match with Donald Trump.
Okay, but I don't know if you ever watched this show, but I had Michael Douglas on this week.
Yeah.
At the top, we were talking about this, and he made a very good point that every other country in the world can do it in months, sometimes weeks. Why can every other country do it in that short a period of time? Are they all so much brighter than America? I don't think so.
That's exactly the point. Some countries manage to hold decisive elections in just a matter of weeks. Meanwhile, Democrats are still acting like Americans need years to make up their minds. With this kind of mentality, they're honestly better off in opposition. They refuse to grasp the obvious. Their disastrous mismanagement of the economy, combined with their